Professor Peter Godman, thank you very much for coming, for deciding to compete for the job of Rector or Dean of the University of U.Porto. We are grateful for all the investment that we have made in studying the situation of our university in order to present your ideas and how you would face the challenge of being the first executive member of this university. So thank you very much. I know that you have had some problems in the transport, but they were well solved. And so we are very interested in hearing your presentation. Just now we have been helped by the central periphery of your presentation in Portuguese, so thank you very much. And the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Thank you for your invitation, and particular thanks to Dr. Silva, whose kindness and efficiency made a difficult journey much easier. I've prepared a summary of this presentation in Portuguese, and I hope you have it. It contains ideas and proposals about the structure of this university and its development. I am not setting out a program, closed and fixed, but attempting to open a discussion. The first and most important task of the rector, as I understand it, is to listen. When the rector speaks at this university, it should, I think, be in Portuguese, a language I am learning. I now read Portuguese more easily than I speak it, because my Portuguese friends and colleagues in English always prefer to speak in English. What is needed is an intensive period of learning in Portugal, which I should intend to do if elected before taking up the office. This would not be a new experience. I had never learned German before I taught at Tübingen, nor had I studied Italian before I taught at Rome. At Rome, I first read Saramago, which woke the interest in Portuguese culture, which is one of the reasons for my application. But there is also a sense of affinity. That affinity does not arise, as you might perhaps think, from the Anglo-Portuguese alliance that goes back to the 14th century. Although I have a British passport, I was born and raised in New Zealand, which, like Portugal, is sometimes described as remote and small. To this I reply that remoteness is defined by the point of observation, which is never objective, and that small is beautiful. The beauty of Portugal's intellectual position derives from its double identity. Both Atlantic and Mediterranean, this identity enables the University of Porto to play a significant role in an international network of scholarship and science. This is what I mean by the title given by the summary of my presentation, The Central Periphery, and that is why one of my main themes will be the internationalization of the university and its implications for the structure and social context. Context matters because internationalization does not simply mean seeking links with the academic world outside Portugal. It also requires the university to strengthen its bonds with the local community while seeking its support for new initiatives. And that entails communication in clear and intelligible form to a non-specialist public of innovations proposed by members of the staff and by the students. I shall, in this presentation, call this communication Rector's Lectures because I should like to sponsor and organize them, mediating between the University of Porto and the community. Significant steps in the direction of internationalization have already been taken here. The University of Porto has more foreign graduate students than the Central European University at Budapest, and it has links in America with the Fulbright Foundation, with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and with Austin, Texas. These strengths are reinforced by its bonds with what might be called the Lusitanian world, by which I mean Brazil and parts of Africa. This network should not only be supported by the rector, I think that it should be expanded far beyond its limits today. The directions in which I propose to expand it are the United States of America, the United Kingdom, and Europe. I said the United Kingdom and Europe as if they are separate, which they may become. You are all aware of Brexit, the withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the European Union. Allow me to say that I consider Brexit to be a historical mistake. It is, however, a mistake which offers marked opportunities to the University of Porto. There are many, like me, opposed to Brexit in British universities. Several of them have forged partnerships recently with continental universities. At Cambridge, where I now work, and at London, there are excellent Portuguese scholars whom I have consulted before I came here. They and others would favor a partnership with Porto. How to proceed in this matter is already indicated by the policy of this university, which I applaud. The medical faculty, for example, has a project based in the Science Park with other Portuguese universities and with University College London. This seems to me a move in the right direction, which I would propose to take further. How to do so? I ask you to consider a hypothesis. Let us suppose that were I elected as rector, that I proposed here a partnership with Cambridge, and that the idea was approved. The rector would then need to write to the Vice-Chancellor of Cambridge, who may have heard of my name. But far more important than Peter Godman is the image of the University of Porto. And that is why I now invite you to put yourself in his place. I invite you to look at Porto with outside eyes. What you see is a modern, research-based university with a substantial body of foreign students and with distinctive strengths, such as architecture at Porto, which is world famous. You also see analogies with the structure of Cambridge, one of the most important of which is the Science Park. The largest and most successful science park in Europe is at Cambridge, a partnership with which would reinforce the strengths of Porto in this area. Let me be clear what I mean here. I mean internationalization, in particular, attracting to Porto the Portuguese subsidiaries of international companies, several of which have a base in the Cambridge Science Park, with specific incentives to venture capital and to spin-offs, including internet and telecom. And above all, I mean the development of joint scientific projects between Cambridge and Porto, supported here by the Foundation for Science and Technology and by the European Research Council. How would such a link at these multiple levels be established between the University of Porto and the University of Cambridge? You will not want me to speak in general and vague terms, so I will be specific. You will understand that I am not a natural scientist, but I am fortunate to have known some who have made major advances in the relationship between science and technology, which is an interest of the University of Porto. One of them, 40 years ago, was a biochemist whom I met as a student, and his name was then Greg Winter. He was preparing a PhD in biochemistry. He then made a number of major discoveries, which led to the foundation of a company for antibody engineering that was sold in 2006 for £702 million. My student friend is now Sir Gregory Winter, the Master of Trinity College, Cambridge, which owns the Cambridge Scientific Park. That is how I would do it. It is here that I should begin to explore a deeper relationship between Porto and Cambridge, with particular attention to their science parks. I do not think it would be difficult or expensive to acquire expert advice. A return flight between London and Porto costs less than €200, and hospitality should be provided by the rector. World-class advice on international collaboration in this area can be obtained at what seems to me very low cost. I wish, however, to add an observation that concerns other areas of the university. When Greg Winter made his discoveries, he did not think of himself as an applied scientist. What he thought he was doing was basic science. Basic science is undoubtedly involved in what I have said, but theoretical science, for example, theoretical physics, may feel itself excluded from my ideas, as will the social sciences and the humanities. That is why I propose a parallel and a complementary structure for these subjects at Porto called the Institute for Advanced Studies. Because there is no Institute for Advanced Studies in Portugal, I should perhaps clarify the term. An Institute for Advanced Studies is fundamentally a research center with professors in a range of subjects and postdoctoral and doctoral students. The prototype is the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton, of which I've been a member, and whose most famous founding figure was Albert Einstein. Theoretical science, such as physics, is combined there with the social sciences and the humanities, and that is what I have in mind. There is an annual program of visiting scholars, scientists, and advanced students. A version of this model has been adopted at Berlin in the Wissenschaftskolleg, and on a smaller scale, institutes for advanced study have been established at a range of universities from Edinburgh to Heidelberg and Munich to Toulouse. These institutes form a network. It is that network which I propose the University of Porto joins. It is no secret that in assessing proposals for funding by such agencies as the European Research Council, which I have done, I have assessed, priority is given to research that is international and interdisciplinary. These are just the types of projects I wish to foster and to support in raising funds. There are several sources of which I have experience, and it does not seem to me that all of them have been exploited by the University of Porto. Some of them are in Germany. The major, the most extensive, and the best organized of these research foundations in Europe is the Alexander von Humboldt Stiftung, which supports scientists, scholars, and postgraduates to develop research projects and form networks. The Humboldt is keen to have a fellow who assumes responsibility for such projects when they are conducted outside Germany. I'm a fellow of the Humboldt Stiftung, and I should be glad to arrange an agreement with the foundation to bring highly qualified scholars to Porto and to send them elsewhere. Other German foundations, of which I have knowledge, include the Thyssen, Henkel, and Volkswagen Stiftungen, together with the National Research Council, the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft. In Britain, a similar role is played by the Leverhulme Trust, and in the United States, I should seek support from the Mellon and Rockefeller Foundations. This university is already linked with the Fulbright Awards, and that is a connection I should wish to develop further. Now, this list is not complete, and of course, members of the university would be free to seek funding elsewhere. I simply note that fundraising seems to me a crucial duty of the rector, and that financial support for projects is more abundant in Germany, the UK, and the USA than it is in Italy, Spain, and France. The benefits of such an Institute for Advanced Study, supported in this manner at Porto and linked with the others that I have mentioned, seems to me immense. a regular exchange of teachers, researchers, and students to some of the leading centers in the academic world, the presence for a semester or for a year of major figures in these fields, and the financial support of research in Portugal by overseas foundations. That is one of the arguments I would use to raise initial funding from the Gulbenkian Foundation and the Foundation for Science and Technology here. The advantages of an Institute for Advanced Study at Porto enhance the geo-intellectual potential of this place. As a hub between the Lusitanian world, Europe, and America, this university could play a pivotal role between academic cultures. With a regular intake of distinguished scholars and scientists and advanced students from abroad, the intellectual community of Porto, together with the town, would benefit from intellectual stimulus. And that is why I propose a series of rector's lectures on innovation in research, aimed at developing interdisciplinary projects with participants from Portugal and outside that would explain the interest and the significance of such work to the wider community. I hope you will allow me very briefly to give an example from my own fields of study. I am primarily a historian of culture in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, but I also work on modern history. A field of research in this area, which, so far as I know, is not represented in Porto, nor indeed in Portugal, is the history of secret intelligence, of which I am editing 3 volumes for the Cambridge University Press. Spies arouse public interest, but they do not, in general, have long memories. Very few of them consider, in long-term perspective, the light which history sheds on contemporary issues such as terrorism, security, and state intervention in privacy. That perspective, I mean the light shed by the longue durée on current issues, might form a focus of an Institute for Advanced Studies at Porto. And it should encourage us to think of the place of interdisciplinary subjects like this one in this university. For where does secret intelligence belong? Is it part of history, or is it part of political science, or is it part of international relations, or is it part of all 3? What are its links with literature and with art? Subjects like that, innovative, yet difficult to accommodate in traditional structures, demand flexibility from the university. That is why I propose a series of rectors' seminars in which members of the teaching staff can discuss new developments and propose changes, and in which the students will be invited to voice interest and criticism. I touch on that subject. You will understand I come from the outside, and my main source is the student newspaper which conducted an interview with me last week. I think that the criticisms as well as the interests of the students at Porto, should be heard and acted on by the rector. I'm convinced of the need for a regular and informal channel of communication between them and the rector, because there are issues in this university that need to be addressed together. Allow me to give you 2 examples. I was told in the interview which I gave to the student newspaper that the number of dropouts, meaning the number of undergraduates failing to complete a first degree, can be as high as 30% at Porto. May I say very clearly that this figure is unacceptable. Measures need to be taken. The first I would propose is a tutorial system, namely a group of students assigned to a member of the teaching staff who advises them on their course, their interests, and their difficulties. I was told in the interview, that this already exists in some departments, but not in all. I think it should be universal at Porto and coordinated by the rectorate. To that purpose, I propose concretely the creation of a tutorial office attached to the rectorate and supervised by me. This office would mediate between faculties, departments, institutes, and the Students' Union to organize a system of mentorship that extended to all parts of the university. No member of the teaching staff would be required to become a tutor, but those who chose to collaborate would know that this counted in their favor when the university allocates resources and makes promotions. Another problem signaled to me by the students is accommodation. They meant rising rents and poor housing. After due financial analysis, I suggest that this university begin a program of constructing or purchasing student accommodation to be organized with full awareness of its social implications for the town. The broader social and intellectual implications of change will need to be considered. By that I mean, the university of the past was dominantly male. The university of the future will be dominantly female. How Porto should address this issue is a matter I would wish to consider with women's representatives, discussing too such services as childcare. On the traditional Portuguese model, while women worked, the family in Porto took care of the children. If the university develops further its internationalization in the ways I have suggested, this model will not function because there will be more parents here without a family in Porto. The provision of childcare facilities, of a crèche, for example, available not only to academics, but also to the non-academic staff and to the students, is one example of the social implications of the policy I have outlined. I do not doubt that answers are to be found by collaboration between the university and the community at Porto. At the beginning of this presentation, I invited you to look at my vision of the University of Porto with outside eyes, what do you now see? You see more than a well-run modern research university, which it is today. What has emerged is a coordinated structure of faculties, departments, and institutes that are flanked by two major institutions. On the one hand, the Science Park, and on the other hand, the Institute for Advanced Studies. Both of them attract cooperation and funding, not only from Portugal, but also from abroad. Both are closely linked to an international network of research, and both promote innovation in the university and foster employment in the community of Porto. This is a rather different picture from the one drawn by the Organization for European Cooperation and Development on Portuguese higher education in 2007, which portrayed an inward-looking institution in which students became professors and remained until retirement. Much has changed since then, since 2007, and not all of it is for the better. The Economist, 10 days ago, reported that no fewer than 250,000 Portuguese left this country during the 4 years of the recent financial crisis. Some of them are academics who are known to me. These are the kinds of excellent scholars and scientists who might be invited back here to Porto to participate in the Science Park and in the Institute for Advanced Studies, and whose contribution would not only enrich research, but also inform students by their experiences abroad. These Portuguese have become citizens of a wider world in which it is not abnormal, even for a foreigner, to become rector of a leading university in Portugal, although, so far as I know, no foreigner ever has. That is, however, a decision for you to take, and I shall perform what I defined at the beginning as the main duty of the rector by listening to your questions. Obrigado.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I would start the period of questions, raising some. The first would be how you have described your institutional idea, but I would like to know your views with more concrete examples, how to incentivize more interchange between science and arts. What could be made at the level of the pre-graduation, what can be made in the CV of the graduations. The curriculum of graduations. The second one will be what priorities in internationalization and how to do it. And the third, you have referred the instrument of ERC to finance the activities of the university in the area of research. What areas do you think that are the priorities also more strongly, considering what are the research capacity of the university? Where do you think that we have more opportunities?
The answer to your third and your first question is similar. The Institute for Advanced Study, which I have suggested, would be there for the theoretical sciences, the social sciences, and the humanities. Those three areas. Your first question was, how could you foster contact between the sciences and the humanities? And my answer to that is primarily on the level of, on two levels. One level are the ideas, by which I mean theory, and secondly, history of science. Both of those I would propose to put in the Institute for Advanced Study. Did you ask about the funding of the Institute?
No. You have referred in your action plan, you have referred the ERC, the European Research Grants. I think you have referred financial implications.
Yes.
You have referred the instrument ERC. Where do you think, considering what you have known about the University of U.Porto, what are the more strong areas where we can be more successful applying for ERC, presenting for ERC financing projects?
Well, if one looks at the University of Porto from the outside, the famous faculty is architecture. The other strengths, there are many strengths which I see, but there is general agreement that both literature and history in Porto are very strong. My fundamental point, though, is not to specify subjects, but to suggest an approach. And the approach I suggest is that the University of Porto, in those subjects or in others, I will give you a further example, in those subjects or in others, links itself with universities in Germany or in Britain. Now, let me be very clear why I am saying Britain and Germany. I have taught for 9 years in Oxford, for 12 years in Tübingen, and for 13 years in Rome. There are excellent Italian scholars, but no one who is not insane wants to have to do with the organization of an Italian university. It is very difficult. The German and the English systems are both ones which are directed toward international research. Now, this is one of the main things I'm saying. This is what I would want very warmly to encourage and to help. I also think it is very important to emphasize how little, outside Germany, the approach of German research foundations is understood. There is no national bias at all. An application from the University of Porto in any subject, scientific, humanities, social sciences, would be regarded with warmth, with great interest. It is forming such links for funding that I see as an important task of the rector and is something I would very much like to do. So my answer to your question, which I hope I understand, is why the Institute for Advanced Study at Porto. Take the situation now. You have a very good university which is research-oriented. You do not have unusual structures. You have points of excellence. I mentioned architecture. It is not my field, but I've read about it. But you do not have a structure in the University of Porto where you could invite the people you have asked me about, the social scientists, the theoretical scientists, and the scholars in the humanities, to come here and collaborate in a project. My idea, therefore, is to provide something important in terms of a structure at Porto which does not exist at present and which is more ambitious than the usual model of a university. Let us consider the information that Vitor Silva has very kindly given me, the ranking of Porto on the international list. The ranking is between 100 and 200, and sometimes between 200 and 300. Let me make it very clear, I want it to be in the top 50. And you will not do that by the traditional university structures. You will create what you have, which is an extremely good research-based university, but you need something extra. And I think that this is best developed by international cooperation, attracting funds, scholars, and scientists to Porto because there is a place where they can conduct their research in a way they cannot. In Germany, there is the Wissenschaftskolleg, which is relatively small, and then there are institutes for advanced studies at, for example, Heidelberg and Munich. They are very small. I have been at the one at Munich. I am intending to suggest something bigger at Porto. Porto as the center for the Atlantic and Mediterranean world in this area. And let me, if I may, draw attention to the fact that an institute for advanced study does not exist in Italy, does not exist in France. It exists in Germany. It doesn't actually exist in Britain, though you have things which are similar in the Oxford and Cambridge college system. So please tell me if I'm answering your question clearly. If I'm not, I will reply. The main point is to bring these subjects together in a new structure which is interdisciplinary and very internationally linked.
Vice President of the board, please.
Thank you for your presence. In your opinion, what is the first priority to the UP? If you are chosen to rector, what on the next day, what is changed in the governance of the UP?
Oh,
and second question, it's very short. In what language you think exercise your activity if you are chosen to rector?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the second.
In what language you think exercise your activity if you are chosen to rector?
The answer to the second question is it must be Portuguese. So I would have to become fluent in Portuguese. I said at the beginning I have done this with Italian and I have also done it with German, neither of which I had studied. You asked me what my first priority would be. I will tell you the truth. If I was looking for votes from the members of this board, I would say I would want to talk to the members of staff. Well, it's not true. I would want to talk to the students. I am told by the students, well, I was told by the one student I have spoken to, that they don't even know the name of the rector and that they have no contact with him. I would want to change that on day one. I am extremely interested in the research that is being done by members of the university, and of course, I've talked to them. I would like it to be done in what is perhaps a different style. Please do not think that I am expressing criticism of the past. I don't know the past, would be inappropriate. But I would want to do it in an informal way, so that people could come to me and talk about their concerns and interests, and that is the case from the youngest students. When I was a student myself at Cambridge, I was 20. I was asked to teach. I am now 63. I've had 43 years' experience. I like them. I get on well with them. I think I've spoken enough, you've understood.
Thank you. Now it's time for Professor Altamiro Costa Pereira, please.
Good afternoon, Dr. Peter Godman. I'm here.
Hello.
Hello. Well, first of all, many thanks for your application, and I have very much enjoyed your analysis and suggestions for future plans for the University of Porto. But I really wonder if you are fully aware about the existing economic and organizational constraints in Portugal, and of course in particular within Porto University. For example, would you be ready to accept a very limited salary and even maybe more limited powers, including being mostly isolated?
Mostly, sorry?
Isolated. During your possible role as rector, because you really do not know much people or do not have much links within the faculty. What I mean is that how do you expect personally even to cope with these challenges? Because it will not be an easy task for you, for somebody from Cambridge, which has a special way of behaving, even of making business, both scientifically, academically, and all sorts of these challenges, and then coming to Porto, which, apart from being a pleasant city and having the sort of things that you mentioned, but also it differs. Although we are from the 14th century allies with the United Kingdom and with England, but we still are a bit far away with respect to the culture and many other issues. That's probably one of the reasons Britain wants to exit from the UK, from Europe. So this is mainly, of course, it's mainly but it is a pertinent, I think it's a pertinent question.
Yeah. When you were speaking, some people behind you were smiling. So I want to say that I think that your question is an excellent one, and thank you for asking it. I will answer you directly. I have already partly answered your question because I spoke about rectors' interdisciplinary seminars. These are designed for me to know what is going on in the university. I also want them to be with an emphasis on innovation, what is new, what doesn't fit. That's why I like the students. They say, this is wrong, this is bad, I don't like it. I want to hear that so that the university can be adapted to it. That seems to me actually quite an intensive task, but it is not enough. That is why your question, your second question, is extremely important. It would have to be done in Portuguese because I want to cultivate links with the town. Because I would want them to contribute to supporting the structures which I have proposed. And this would involve, naturally, primary conversation in Portuguese, but it would also involve cultivating the English community. I will give you, it's a very small, unimportant point. I only mention it because it seems to me fun. I would like to organize an international conference at Portugal called Cultures of Wine, which would deal with everything from winemaking to wine as metaphor, to wine as a cultural symbol. Now, you can see, I'm told that Mr. Symington is linked with this university. And I know that he is a major wine producer. I've never met him, I don't know him. But drawing in this sort of interest, because it is a major point about Porto wine, and to be honest, I am interested. I like wine. To draw in the community into a communal enterprise and to talk to them, frankly, about raising money. And if the university approved a building program, that would have to be planned and organized in agreement with the town. So I see that as extremely important, that form of contact. So two sides to it. You emphasize the Portuguese side, and of course you're right, because it's most of it. There is also the Anglo-Portuguese community, as well as the international community. You speak of the rector being isolated. It depends on how you do the job. If you see yourself as a symbolic figure of ritual, yes, you'll be isolated. And if you're a foreigner coming here, you'll be even more isolated, so you're quite right. I have no intention of doing it, none whatsoever. And I have to tell you, I have never been worried about it either when I thought of applying. I will tell you how the process occurred. I have had a long-standing interest in Portugal because of Salazar. The reason why Salazar interests me is Salazar has always represented to me a mental Tibet. He wanted to shut Portugal off from the rest of the world. And the thing that interests me about Salazar is his use of historical symbols. One of the most important of whom, as you will know at Lisboa, is the statue of Henry the Navigator. Now, I was actually present when the historical revision of this mythology was taking place, and the reason I was my colleague in Oxford was Peter Russell. And I know this will sound terrible if I tell you it, but we were friends because he too was a New Zealander. The main expert on Portuguese history in Oxford was Peter Russell, who wrote the book that demolished all the rubbish that Salazar had said about the Portuguese explorations. And I began then to develop a strong interest in Portuguese culture. What you do need to know, however, and this is more important because it concerns not me, but the University of Porto and Portugal in general, is that although Portugal does a great deal, for example, in the European community, European Union, Portugal does not project its image. Portugal is not well known. Spain is better known, and not for good reasons. The evolution of Portuguese democracy seems to me very much more impressive than the evolution of Spanish democracy. And the role that Portugal has taken in the European Union is much more active. However, you do not want a long political discourse from me. Have I indicated the ways in which I would make contact? I would do it formally in rectors' seminars, rectors' lectures, rectors' contacts with the teaching staff and with the students in, if I may say so, a dynamic way. But I would also try to bring people to Porto who would open up the community. And I would link the university as closely as I could with the local community.
And what about the low wage? What about the low wage? Salary.
Well,
The low salary of the Porto
I'm
rector.
not sure that I've understood, because I asked Vitor Silva, and he said about 6,000, and I didn't know whether he meant a month or a year.
Exactly. That's a year.
Professor Aura Teixeira.
Well, thanks so much for your presentation and for being here. I also like very much students, but if you have a chance, please talk with staff, both academic and non-academic, and you will love them. We have a highly committed and very resilient staff, academic and non-academic. However, we face two major challenges. One is aging. And
Sorry, one is?
aging, people are having a higher age.
Yeah.
So aging. We don't know, unfortunately, it's not a question of child care, it's more elderly care, you know? And so the challenging is, unfortunately. But this is one of the issues that is more problematic, and not only University of Porto, but universities in general, they face. And I would like to hear from you, how do you, if elected, how you can handle, or ideas to handle this aging population within the staff, mostly on academic staff, because non-academic staff is younger, fortunately. And also the issue I meant about resilience and about highly committed staff, and that is true if you see our research and our points of excellence. This is made under very harsh constraints. During the last decade, people most generally were not promoted, and still they perform and outperform given those constraints. And you did not mention particularly that aspect in your presentation, but I will, and I ask also, what are your ideas in order to motivate, incentivize this good staff that we have? Thank you.
When you say staff, do you mean the academic staff or the non-academic? But you mean both?
Yeah, but the question of aging is mostly academic staff.
I think that the way that you can motivate staff, both academic and non-academic, is by moving them into a wider context. That is to say, I know about the cuts in financing of Portuguese university. I've been told that salaries have been reduced by 20%. You need to know that this kind of complaint, which I have deep understanding of, is general. The situation is regarded as unsatisfactory in Britain, in Italy, and in Germany, and in France, all of which I have close contacts with. I do not believe that any national system, including the Portuguese system, is capable of making up the defect, the loss. That is only capable of the situation being improved by moving into a wider context which is international and drawing in funds to Porto from abroad. That is how I would propose to incentivize both research and non-academic staff by making their conditions of work comparable. For example, why should someone who does Vitor Silva's work at Porto be paid less than someone who does it at Munich? In a network of international collaboration, conditions should be identical. So what I would propose to do is, by moving the university in the direction of international collaboration, equaling the standard and improving what is on offer here, drawing not only on Portuguese funds. As to aging, I shall soon need it myself, the help that you mention. I think that there should be a completely different form of thinking. And this is partly an answer to your question. Partly an answer to your question. The thing that seems to me terrible, not at Porto, but in general, with the university structure is the division between, for example, the rector or the senior personnel and the students. It's not only terrible, it's absurd. And that is my answer to your question. I think that there should be a system of mutual support, where the university enlisted student help with aging problems and vice versa. By which I mean, I've already said it, the university providing tutorials to students. It should be a system of mutual support, and there should be financial incentives for doing it. There is a system, in Portugal I don't know, but there is a system of civil service in Britain and Germany where help is provided to the aged by young volunteers. I think that help should be provided to the young by older volunteers. I myself would want, within the university structure, to provide incentives. I said in my presentation that those who offered tutorials, I don't think anyone should be forced. I'm completely opposed to requiring it. It should be voluntary. But those who are prepared to do it should know that this would count in their promotion and would count in the allocation of university funds to their departments, and vice versa, that there would be credits for the students in their first degree as a form of civil accomplishment. Is that an answer to your question?
Good afternoon. Thank you for your presentation. I have, well, several questions, but mainly with your model, which has to do with the Institute of Advanced Studies. I mean, I didn't understand why this Institute of Advanced Studies would foster only certain fields of expertise. You mentioned humanities and so on, and will not, apparently, if I understood correctly, have things like health and technology and others.
You're quite right. It was because of I had half an hour. I said social sciences. Let me, for example, respond very directly to what you have just asked, because you're right to ask it. Economics. That, of course, should be there, and I didn't say it because I said social sciences. In addition to that, there are major links to be made between an Institute for Advanced Studies in Porto, in that field, and others elsewhere. For example, the chief of the Institute for Advanced Studies at Toulouse is Paul Seabright, who is one of the leading developmental economists in Europe, perhaps in the world. I actually know him. He was my colleague in Oxford. This sort of field most definitely should be included. My answer to your question is, naturally, your question is right. It was just I was trying to be brief.
But, I mean, you didn't mention fields like health and technologies. So you see that those fields will fit better on your scheme of things in the science parks. And you would divide that say the topics that would fit will be better fitting
Well,
be placed on the science parks and others will be on your institute?
I very much see what you mean. Yes, I had tended to think in those terms that it belonged in the science park. But take, for example, architecture. It could be in both. Or what you have said. Technology, yes, I did think of the science park. But there are certain areas of medical research that could belong in both. This is an area that would need to be discussed with the experts. I do not have a policy. I would be open.
Okay, so Professor Lucia Matos, please.
Please.
Thank you for your presentation and for coming here to present your ideas in person. You propose you propose this Institute for Advanced Studies, stressing the research component of the university, but you never mention anything about how your vision is for undergraduate studies, which of course include the majority of the students of this university. So I wonder if this interplay of different areas that are present in your idea for the Institute of Advanced Studies can be, the same model can be used for the undergraduate level, if you see it that way, and how you would implement such an idea.
Thank you very much for that question. And you are quite right. I did not specify that level. Again, the reason was quite simply the time. I had half an hour. Let me answer your question very directly because I think it's fundamental. An Institute for Advanced Study could be constructed with a teaching component. For example, I don't think I should say their names, but they are two Portuguese historians whom I consulted before I came here, who could teach part of their time in Porto when they were at the Institute for Advanced Study. I'm talking about a dual structure. Now, this already exists. It is perfectly normal. For example, when I was at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, I taught at the university. And that is what I mean here. It would, however, be with a difference, which is on a voluntary basis. You need, and you doubtless do understand, what motivates good scholars. In general, it is not money. It is time. Time to do their own research, and there are many, I would say the majority, who wish to have contact with students, to run a seminar, maybe to give lectures, whatever the teaching form is. That should then be something which is offered to the university on a voluntary basis. Now, I think that this could have a very considerable impact upon undergraduate teaching at Porto, because it would be possible to devise a system where some people who teach abroad come here for periods of time. They would come, as you rightly say, for a research stay, but they would also engage in some teaching. And I could well imagine, I think I know, that Portuguese scholars who teach, for example, in England would be interested in doing that. The other thing that seems to me very important, and I mentioned it only in relation to my own studies, which are not important, it can be any field of study, is innovation and the introduction of new subjects in Porto which are not here. You mentioned, for example, technology. One could take a field of study about which I do not know and which is not represented in the offer of the University of Porto. I don't know, for example, I've looked, but I wasn't able to find it, various forms of historical anthropology. They may well be present in Porto, but they are under broader headings. This kind of field could be introduced through an institute and then links established that brought people here regularly. So my answer to your question is, I do not see the Institute for Advanced Study solely at the research level. I see it also at the level of contributing to undergraduate education, but I emphasize on a voluntary basis, not a compulsory basis. And I see it as a vehicle for innovation and change. Is that a clear answer? Yes. Okay.
It's time for Luís Filipe Antunes, please. Professor Luís Filipe Antunes, please.
So, hi, good afternoon. I want to first thank you for being here and for your excellent presentation. I think that the discussion is quite helpful also. So, I've been at Princeton, at the Institute for Advanced Studies for some time, and I do know the system and the more theoretical work that has been done there. But knowing Portugal, I really doubt that you can find the money, the finance, to set up this institute in Portugal with resources from the National Science Foundation. So my question is, let's imagine that you are not successful when applying for the National Science Foundation. Do you have any backup plan
Yes.
for trying to set up this? And I have just a second question. That is, here in Portugal, we don't have just promotions. If a faculty, let's say the computer science department, wants to promote someone to full professor, then we have this application for full professor that anyone can apply. So the strategy that the department may or may not have on the promotion can be completely overridden by some other application that win this position. So we don't have that mechanism to just do promotions within the professors.
Mm-hmm. Your question seems to me very important because it points to a mentality I want to change. You speak about the difficulty of raising funds in Portugal. Let me be very clear indeed that I have never believed you would be able to do the things I have suggested this evening on the basis of purely Portuguese funds. I have always said, and I tried to be specific, perhaps rather boringly, when I mentioned the other foreign foundations that would contribute. I am discussing an international institute at Porto. I am thinking of making an initial application, not only, as you said, to the Foundation for Science and Technology, but also to the Gulbenkian Foundation. But this is something that could be combined, for example, with the Mellon Foundation, the Leverhulme Foundation, the Humboldt Stiftung. There are several. It will not, if you were voicing a criticism, I agree with it. I don't think it's realistic to do it on the basis of purely Portuguese funds. It is, however, realistic to think that an initial contribution to make a start to such an institute may be raised in Portugal. And my reason for saying so is it's already been tried. One of my Portuguese sources did it. He actually talked to the foundation, and there was a lack of support at the university he was at. The university was Lisboa.
So it was based on my experience that when I came to Portugal, by working on a more theoretical area, by knowing that the Portuguese government has this more applied notion of put the research money, I had to change a little bit my research. So it was not a criticism. I do believe that the engine of research is the theoretical aspect of it. It's the engine, and then we have the wheels and every other application, but still, it's a problem.
I'm grateful to you for bringing this up because I have thought the same. You know better than I do. But looking at the pattern of Portuguese funding, you speak of this emphasis upon applied, for example, applied science. I've seen that too. And that is one of the issues that I would want to raise here, which is how this university supports and finances theoretical research. Because I do not believe, let me state this very clearly, I do not believe that any university, certainly not this one, should be entirely devoted to applied science. There must be a place for theoretical science, and what precisely the relationship between the two of them should be, I would need to discuss with scientists. I don't actually know enough to be precise, but I actually think I understand the issue. Is that? Thank you.
Engenheiro Pedro Silva Dias.
Good afternoon, Professor. I congratulate you on providing us with a very clear vision on the role that you see for the university, both in terms of the Science Park and the Institute for Advanced Studies. You have been also providing us with examples of international partnerships and cooperations with other institutions, and to some extent also in Portugal with some foundations such as the previously mentioned Gulbenkian. I would like to know if you could comment on what role would play other domestic partnerships with other universities, for example, also with the business community, with the startup community, and with other domestic stakeholders that, as far as I understand until now, you have not delved into. Would they be a priority to you, or would they be a second tier?
They are an equal priority. I indicated earlier that I do not think that the process of internationalization at Porto can be separated from closer integration with the community. I would also seek funding and support from the local community. There are various ways in which this could be done. One is obviously the science park. But there are also, and I don't think that this should be underestimated, there is considerable interest in the cultural sphere that could be supported, for example, by banking and by technology. These are links which the rector should seek. I think it's an extremely important part of the job. It would also, for me, be an interesting part of the job because, of course, I would then get to know them. Now, I have done this in the past in improbable circumstances. I am not a Catholic, but I worked with a pope who was Ratzinger because I worked in the archive of the Roman Inquisition when he was Cardinal Prefect. And the archive of the Roman Inquisition was in a terrible state. It had never been cleaned since 1542. And there was a situation which was much worse than that of the University of Porto and its underfunding, and I had to raise money, which I did by an odious, horrible, and repulsive medium called television. I worked with television and with His Holiness, as he now is, for a period of time, and I think that the ability to get on with the commercial world, television is commercial, and with the Grand Inquisitor, as he then was, it does involve a certain amount of social skill, and it is extremely interesting. But it's only interesting if you have an intellectual objective. And my intellectual objective would be improving the position of Porto and putting it on the international map in a very significant way.
Professor Carlos Azevedo, please.
Good afternoon, Professor Godman. Thank you for your application and for your stimulating and challenging presentation. One of your aims is to promote a series of rectors' interdisciplinary seminars in both sciences and the arts. And the purpose here is to identify common areas of research and teaching. On the other hand, you propose a series of rectors' public lectures to communicate information to a non-specialist audience. And the purpose here is also, as I understand it, to get funding for projects in the local community. My question is, how precisely do you intend to organize and implement these seminars and these lectures?
The seminars would be within the university. They would be between members of university staff, and also I would welcome a presence of students. The rector's lectures would not be confined to the university. There would be invitations sent out to the community. And let me make it clear that although you are quite right to say that I should wish to use them to raise funds, what I would want to do in the first place, and their primary purpose, would be to arouse interest in innovation. Universities do not communicate well. When I was waiting upstairs, there is this beautifully produced magazine called Campus. It is extremely nicely done. I wonder how wide its readership is in the community of Porto. And I wonder if any magazine, not that one, but all magazines, can possibly reach a community in the way that the spoken word does. This is something of which I have experience. It doesn't exist in Cambridge and it doesn't exist in Rome, but it does exist in Germany. It's called the Studium Generale. And this is a thing which is a university teacher presenting the interest of a new subject to the public, the people from the town. I think it's an extremely good idea. And then you would draw in the members of the community who are interested, and at that stage, after the innovation had been explained, you would speak about the ideas. So the two forms that you spoke of, the seminars and the lectures, would be linked. And the main point of both of them is to define innovation. It is not what this university does well in the conventional and traditional way. It is what the university can do that is new. Thank you.
I think we don't have any other questions to raise. So I would only like to underline the following about the competition for international funds. I think that the University of U.Porto has been very successful and is very successful in attracting or mobilizing or financing the area of life science and technology in international competition. This is the reality. I think that your comments are especially, I tried to, during the session, to collect some information, but especially in social sciences and humanities. Maybe we have not been so successful in attracting funds from the ERC, from the Horizon 2020, that is now the most powerful source of financing of European entities. But in what concerns life science and technology, we have been very, very successful
true,
in
yeah.
mobilizing funds. Thank you very much for your presentation, for your openness and availability to discuss with us our doubts, our questions. So we are very grateful, and we are sure that your presence has enriched the competition that we have. So next Friday we will have the meeting where the decisions will be taken, and immediately we will contact you about the results. And thank you very, very much for your